Mark, David, welcome into the back room.
Hey, Andy, good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So congrats on the film, Hard Hat Riot. It is so good. It tells such a fascinating story from 1970 with eye-opening connective tissue to today's political landscape. And it premieres Tuesday, the 30th on PBS. We're taping this the week before, but by the time it posts, it actually might be tomorrow, the 30th. So I hope folks will tune in and watch it. Mark, you directed and produced the film. David, you're co-producer on the film, and you wrote the book, The Hard Hat Riot, Nixon, New York City, and the Dawn of the White Working Class Revolution, on which the film is partly based. So I'd love for each of you to explain why you wanted to share with us this particular event in history.
David, you go first. You started with the book.
As I've said in other places, a really difficult present can sometimes be best understood through the past that made it. And basically, when Donald Trump became a serious contender in 2016, I knew I wanted to do a lesson of history. I knew this was the moment in history when the FDR coalition breaks apart, when the first tensions within the Democratic Party based on class emerge. And I just wanted to dive forward into that story. And that's eventually what brought the book to life. And then eventually what brought me to Mark.
And well, I met David through the two executive producers, Mikala Beardsley and Carrie Woods, who gave us the book. And I read well, at first I looked at the title and I was like, wait a second, I was here. I was in New York when this happened. And then I read the book and, of course, when it happened and over the years, I'd never realized what David's work and the book really explores. And it was an eye-opener, and obviously speaking so much about where we are today and what's happened. And so much of the punditry, so many of the people, Andy, that you've had on your podcast talk about, how did the Democrats lose the working class? And here was this microcosm, an event that actually I remember because I was working at the Maisels as an apprentice editor on Gimme Shelter, but I had the radio on because I wanted to find out if Willis Reed was going to play that night in Game 7 because he was injured. And so I was, there reconstituting film and listening, and all of a sudden, we've got a news break. There's a disturbance down on Wall Street. The construction workers are beating up all the anti-war protesters. So the fact that it was an opportunity to go back to an event in my own personal life, but see it in a whole new way and explore something that happened 55 years ago, but that speaks so much to the moment we're in now was irresistible.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a little bit with you guys. The riot was a turning point in American class relations and political culture. We had the Vietnam War, the Kent State shootings, the civil rights movement, political assassinations, patriotism. It seems like all the tension, the frustration, the anger, and fear just exploded that day. But there was also a lot going on in New York City then as well. Economic crisis, poverty, crime, union strikes. How much of the riot's meaning do you think was local versus national/political?
I mean, what allows it to happen is, in a sense, local, in the way that it's only an accident of history that these two Americas are condensed into one place, because this is the moment when the World Trade Center and other skyscrapers are being built, and the southern face of Manhattan that we know today is really rising of steel and glass. And because of that, there are thousands and thousands of blue-collar workers condensed into this area less than a mile wide of lower Manhattan. And at the same time, an epicenter of the anti-war movement in America and in New York City was Wall Street. So really, we have the beginning of these two Americas, and by an accident of history, in this really colonial part of New York City, they are condensed, and that's what allows it to boil over. But in every other way, the tensions, the issues, that's national. That is being felt throughout the country. That is seen in town and gown clashes, even at Kent State and colleges across America. So that in no way is New York City, but that New York City was a working class city still in 1970, that you have the emergence of this class really just decimation of the working class is coming with the deindustrialization of America that hits New York before it hits the rest of America. There's a lot about New York that allows it to happen, that makes, oddly, New York City kind of a harbinger of what's going to happen to the middle American squeeze. Most people don't think about New York City as being so very American in this way. But all the tensions, everything that comes out that day and in the week is found across America.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that's interesting, Andy, is that a lot of New Yorkers weren't really aware of what happened. I mean, this was pre-social media. In fact, when I met David and we started on the project, I remember I reached out to my girlfriend at the time, who I was living with on the Upper West Side, and I was like, what do you remember from the Hard Hat Riot? And she was like, what's the Hard Hat Riot? And she had to go to Google. She was right here in New York. So many New Yorkers weren't really aware. It was in the papers, but it was just a different time. So it's what's interesting is how you can take a little known incident in history and yet find the seeds of so much of what's to come.
One of the interesting things about the film is that so many of the key players from that period, including college students, construction workers, labor leaders, political aides, police, are featured in the film. Their views, their recollections are really quite compelling. And it's hard to imagine the film without them. Was it hard to track them down? And were they on board from the get-go, or did they need to be convinced to talk after 55 years?
Well, that's a good question. I think, David obviously had done a lot of the work, the legwork in writing the book. So that was a huge head start. But some of the principal characters came through Daphne Pinkerson, producer, and myself, meeting with the leaders of the construction industry, the union leadership, and opening ourselves up to kind of their questions to us, making our work available to them. It required, trust building. They appreciated David's book, so that was a huge first step. But we had to be honest. I had to be honest. Like, hey, I was on the other side. If I was down there, you'd be on me, and I'd be on you. So we had people come over to our studio. We didn't hide who we were. We offered to show our films so that they get a sense of the kind of work we have been doing. And I think through that process, they opened up.
I'm a boy from Queens, and I love the accents. They're just unbelievably authentic.
That's so funny you say that. My sister's an internationally known linguist, and she came up to me after the screening that you came, and she said, this film has got to be shown at linguistic conferences. She says, because New Yorkers don't speak like this anymore. This
No, it took me right.
About. And she said, you have preserved, kind of the New York that was. I never thought about that.
No, it took me right back to my youth. So Marc, when you first approached the film, what was the central story you wanted to tell? Was it about the clash itself, the larger social forces behind it, or what you thought was its lasting impact?
Well, it was all those things. I mean, and David's book, covers that. I think for me, the personal goal was twofold. One was we need to find characters, hard hat characters, who are willing to open up, be honest, especially those that were in the riot themselves. And an audience needs to feel for them. An audience needs to be able to relate to them and hopefully like them. They disagree totally with some of their politics and what they did that day. So that was the number one goal. The number two goal was, how can you tell this story in a movie that makes you feel that it's all happening in this week, this incredible week, from when Nixon expanded the war to Cambodia, Kent State happened Monday, the Hard Hat Riot happened that Friday. How can you because there's backstory that you do want to include in terms of what's happening in New York and what's happening across the country. But to create a kind of momentum, a narrative momentum, that was a real challenge. And yet at the same time, fit as much of the context as we could without feeling you got derailed and where am I and what happened. So those were, in terms of the filmmaking challenges for me, the empathy for the hard hats and a feeling for the hard hats and a sense of what a week. And I felt good when a number of people who are our contemporaries or my contemporaries came out and said, wow, that was a week.
It was a week. I didn't realize all that shit took place in a week. David, your book lays the foundation for the film. How do you feel Marc's cinematic treatment added or illuminated what is typically harder to convey through prose alone?
Yeah, I mean, film is three-dimensional, multi-sensory in a way book can't. You just can't do it with prose. I try, when writing the book, to convey smog, the sounds of the city, different sound. The city sounded different then, right? So you can do only so much with language. That film allows liberty. I always thought, as soon as I got the original records, and then, you know, when I was looking at that first footage that is so critical to the film, that we're the first people to show it, I originally was looking at it in one of those crank reel viewfinders, 16 reel film. I'm cranking through it. I'm like, and I'm bursting at the seam. I'm like, I can't believe this exists. I've got it, got the visual. So right away, I felt like it was cinematic, even before I'd written the book, or even before I'd written the first draft. So I always knew that with the right filmmaker, you know, that there was a film here, that there was something that we could convey visually, with sound, and with story that, you know, was unique to this medium. I will also say Marc and I were kind of on the same page, right? In my book, it's a 3 acts. My book's 3 acts. The middle is the riot. I tease the riot in the first few pages, right? It's a very cinematic way of storytelling, right? I tease the drama and then I go back in time, right? And then, you know, eventually, then there's the first act, everything that leads into the tumult of 1970, including Chicago 68 and other stories that were not known that I tell, like the other side of Moratorium Day, this blue collar revolt that happened on Moratorium Day. That is in mid-October. To that point, it was the greatest demonstration in terms of size in American history. And that story was told, and it was the most beautiful face of the anti-war movement. But in that moment, there was also a blue collar revolt that day. And so I wanted to tell about all these antecedents, but bring it to the riot tension. And then afterwards, right, tell how it leads to Nixon, how it leads to the change in the Republican Party. And Marc and I were on the same page in that same 3-act structure. But obviously, you have to leave much more on the cutting room floor with a film than even a book. And I think that, you know, we just want to keep that propulsive story of that week going while giving as much context as we could.
Yeah, I would say the biggest loss was probably 68. We just couldn't,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, because obviously you had a riot there. You had, you know, kind of police, the Chicago police, blue collar against the anti-war protesters. But it was just, there was so much to try to work in that fell by the wayside.
Yeah, the archival footage is amazing. And to think that so much of that, or most of it, has not been seen by anyone really is just stunning.
Yeah.
Marc, when you first conceptualized the film, was there any particular intent to make it a film from the student's perspective or the hard hat's perspective? And did your vision evolve as you began making the film and as you dove deeper into each side?
Well, my vision was to make the hard hats the protagonists. And the film it's interesting. You saw the festival version minus the final scene, which was a shocker. But the open you saw will not be seen by the audience. And that, it tells you the difference in, you know, and that's part of I guess the American experience formula is just they have like a cold open where there's a narrator and they kind of just tell you, you know, this is what the film is going to be about. Whereas the version you saw, the so-called festival version, it starts up on the 110th floor as the World Trade Center is being worked, and you're seeing New York City, expanse of New York City, through the eyes of a hard hat. And for me, that was important. In other words, because that's the point of view that we haven't seen. And look, as I say, I was on the other side. I was 19-year-old, but we've seen so many films, so many documentaries from the counterculture, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental, all important, key. But I had never seen, there was a film called Joe, which Daphne and I actually watched, but you know, there really was not much out there from the other perspective.
And even that film, Joe, which was a huge box office hit for the little they put into it, was refashioned once the riot had occurred. And it was really just totally condescending, exactly how the era was changing, how they were portraying the working man. It was, you know, Joe in that movie is this like two-dimensional veteran. He's, you know, he's gung-ho. He's just all the stereotypes that were in fashionable crowds allowed about the working class at that time. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you can't say enough about what Marc's touching on. And that, you know, when I was writing the book, I had to put this right in the intro to take it on right away. Because, like, as I put it in the book, winners write history. And we think of that in terms of wars between nations, but it also applies to cultural conflicts within nations. And the people who won this culture war became the stewards of our culture. The new left, the counterculture, they became the stewards of our culture from media to Hollywood. And our job was to tell a blue-collar perspective on this turning point of the 60s and on the class break of the Democratic Party, and while also making sure that the students had three dimensions too, and that we gave them voice. And
I think that when you were saying as the progress went on, and as we saw that, you know, we were getting some of the hard hats who were actually there to open up, to be honest about what happened then and who they were, where they came from. So the secondary challenge became what David just refers to, that the students, from their eyes, maybe, you know, they were caricatured, just as the students caricatured the hard hats, but we had to try to flesh them out.
Mhm.
And that became more of a focus. And there was some feedback that we got initially that, you know, hey, okay, you're accomplishing, showing us a world we don't know, showing us stuff that we haven't seen before, but you got to respect the other side as well, which certainly I was a part of. So that, I think, changed as we went on. And I think it is interesting. One of the things that touched me at the screening is that it's one of the students who shows the most emotion about the tragedy of Vietnam, a student who didn't go, who had medical issues, but who
was vociferously against the war.
Right.
But he has great empathy for the man, his peers who had to go.
Yeah, a touching moment.
Yeah, and yeah, touching moment. I think that you know, it's gonna, you don't question your own gravity. So to a certain part of our country, no matter how balanced we try to make the film, they're so used to the student's point of view of being the almost angelic protagonist, and that they didn't make mistakes along the way towards the righteous, what was many righteous causes of that era. And, you know, if you're going to do an honest depiction of that period, you're going to have to show it warts and all. And I still think, no matter how much we strive to make it fair, for people that can only see the students as pure protagonists, everything they did was right and righteous, they're going to have issues with the film, as they did with my book. But you know what? That's always the case, right? You can't please everybody. And in some ways, you know, you've done the right thing when you get fired from the two fringes of our country. And all we can do at the screening was this beautiful moment in the room where people that voted for Trump and people that voted for Biden and Harris, right? You had a very rare moment where you had different classes of New Yorkers together and that are never together. And our hope is like this, because so many films come from the vantage point of the students and of the movements of the era, our hope is that like here is something that gives an understanding of not only the unfashionable masses of that time and who was, you know, the class strains that make the Civil War, the class war beneath the Vietnam War, and that leads to so much of the civil strife of our own time, and how all of that tension really can not only help us understand the present, but can also help us maybe get spark some empathy among all sides.
It could have been so easy for the film to devolve into this caricature because everybody, romanticizes about the 60s. There's been so many documentaries and so much stuff done about the 60s. But what you didn't do was, you stayed away from stereotyping the students as, bratty radical youth. And you stayed away from stereotyping the construction workers as aggressive, blue collar, Archie Bunker types. I think the three-dimensional aspect that you were talking about comes through very clearly in the film. For me, Mark knows how steeped I am in the craziness of politics. I was watching the film, and then all of a sudden it just hit me. It's like I'm watching Trump and MAGA and everything we're experiencing right now. Nixon and Trump, and the parallels that we can draw between the two of these very similar, in some ways, very similar leaders, and how they willfully manipulated the working class. And that is a real interesting, perhaps the most interesting takeaway from the film for me, is how there is that connective tissue, deep connective tissue between 55 years ago and what we're seeing today.
Well, look, we can talk about this because you were there. The ending that was missing, and which unfortunately will not be in the broadcast version on Tuesday, but hopefully, the festival version will someday also be on the archive, was Ronald Reagan, saying that the working man is now going to have a friend in the White House, and let's make America great again. Now,
Yeah.
I admit, I read David's book where that was quoted, and then I was like, wow, did Reagan say that? I didn't remember it myself.
Yeah,
then we got the archival footage, and I was like, wow, with the Statue of Liberty behind him, and I was kind of amazed by it. So now your interpretation that you've just given us, when we first discussed, and we can discuss this publicly because, the executive producer was on the stage with us after this mishap. She was as shocked as us, she claimed, and I take her at her word that there was a mistake made in preparing the festival version, and they left out the final scene. But obviously that scene is the button to everything you just said about then and today. And of course, that's what I was wondering when we initially had the conversation, which was in the spring. And okay, the Trump administration was getting ready, to attack public media. And where she said, we can't risk, this film is too important. It needs to be seen. And we don't want to risk the gatekeepers at PBS not putting it on the air. So we have to lose that scene. So to Cameo's credit, I suggested let's do a festival version, which she agreed to, which was great, where we could include that. But I was like, why? What's the problem with the gatekeepers? Why would anyone? What's their problem with this? All she said was it's too political. I was like, too political? The whole film's about the white working class moving from the Democratic coalition to Republican. You got Lindsey, Nixon, McGovern. Why is this too political? I still don't know the answer, although in July, when the big, beautiful bullshit bill was passed, I did reach out and said, Cameo, I feel terrible. Her and her whole staff, All American Experience, are going to be laid off by the end of the year. But what do you got to lose now? Let's go with it. And she was like, it's too late. So all that is to just say, whether it was preemptive self-censorship, the chill in the air, I still don't know. But your point about 55 years ago and today being in sync in an unbelievable way, it's still there, but I don't know if there was fear that this was too explicitly putting an exclamation point on it. I don't know.
If you read,
it's like, how when people online post something and they say, tell me you are blah, blah, blah without telling me you're blah, blah, blah. That's what it felt like to me. It's like, does anybody sitting in that theater think we just watched a film that didn't connect the original Make America Great Again to the current Make America Great Again? And by not doing your ending, we're not going to make that connection. Like, so there was for me, and I'll just speak as frankly as I can, it seemed like there was an authenticity taken away from the film because it seemed obvious that the film didn't want to go there. And I'm not saying whether it's you or whoever, I'm just saying to people who watch the film, I'm sure some are going to scratch their heads and go, well, it's sort of dancing around this, but it's not.
Even if we included the Reagan scene, you know, and I had to deal with this in my afterwards, if you include that scene, that's still almost a half century ago at this point. And so it's a bridge into the present without getting into the present. So that the reason it completes it is that it brings us, because this is the Reagan Democrat, and our film was about the making of the Reagan Democrat. What is not known is that Nixon began what Reagan brands and basically becomes a Reagan Democrat, becomes a Trump Republican. And we're showing what the making of that Reagan Democrat. But I mean, we still had the distance that history allows. We wouldn't want to get too much in the present, because then our current conflicts will inevitably poison the ability to create empathy. So that is one of the great things that historical documentaries or a book can allow. It allows us to sort of understand our current divides with the distance of history. And, you know, I have the book I can dive into. Listen, if you read the book, the sense that, you know, to quote Twain, that history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme.
Yes.
It's going to rhyme. It's going to ring in your head, that rhyme, because like I had to battle when I wrote the book to have 2 chapters on Law and Order. They didn't even want it in the book. They're like, this is antiquated. And then like the George Floyd drama happens. And suddenly like the words Law and Order are in the air. And nothing we went through in 2020 was not gone through magnified times 10 in the 60s in terms of, you know, civil disorder. And this is true of everything. Rediscovering the working man that happened in '69 when the press misunderstood Nixon, just as they would misunderstand Trump, with all the snobbery that allowed for that misunderstanding. So by going with that past, we were able, while we would have loved to have hinted to the present, that past does allow us to sort of sort through so much of what plagues us today at this moment that not only forms it, but maybe allows us to, you know, as Marc personally experienced, even Nixon, who was a reviled figure on the left, and as I noted in the book, even when his memoir wanted to advertise in the Times and the Washington Post, these pillars of free speech, they would not publish an advertisement for Nixon's memoir. So even the paragons of free speech, he was so toxic to their readership, they wouldn't even publish an ad for the memoir. So, you know, but now with the distance that history allows, we can see the demons of Nixon, but also like the more complicated man, the man who had this working class background, who got into Yale and Harvard but couldn't go, had to stay home during the Great Depression, help his family. The boy who, you know, went to get groceries for his family at 4 a.m. before school to help with his parents' store, and then had to get the A's that he did in school. Like, we couldn't get into all of that in the film, but that person helps us understand how the Republican Party shifts from blue bloods to blue collars. It's somebody who his gut came from that.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. The other day, somebody made an analogy to me. They said, you know, when you eat a chocolate sundae, like, you don't need that cherry on top. It makes it so much, you know, more interesting, but you don't need it. That's the way I walked away from the film. The ending that you didn't do could have been a cool cherry on top, but it didn't really detract from the film, the historical value of the film. You still do get the connection, but for me, what would have been cool is to make people appreciate and perhaps be more concerned with the guy who is sitting in the White House right now, because he is a student of history, and we are seeing history repeat itself. And he's studied everyone from Hitler to Nixon to Reagan, steals from these people. And so it just would have been a louder punctuation, I guess. But the bigger point is what audiences will clearly see, which is it's like somebody just leapt from 1970 into the present tense, because so much of the political landscape is exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, that was really the eye opener of David's book, was reading it and seeing, beyond Vietnam, which obviously was so central, and beyond the civil rights movement, because race, was obviously key. But that the fundamental economic shift that's happening was absolutely essential to all these changes, and yet we misread, or I misread, the counterculture misread the power of the culture that we were countering against. In other words, that how powerful the need for patriotism and respect for the flag and family values and religion and all the things that, the counterculture was how powerful they were and how they can overcome even your own economic self-interest. And we see it even in pop culture, where you hear the stories of the disrespect, somebody stepped on your shoe or somebody, and it's like, what? You got shot? You got, it's like, it's incomprehensible. Yet in the human psyche, obviously, this need for respect, for agency, for a sense of value, being heard, all of those things counts tremendously. And I certainly discounted it. But I will say the other side also, it's what David said, I think is unusual. You were at a screening where there were MAGA people, and some came out to the bar with us afterwards, which was great. And the ability to hang out, and from their side also to say, hey, we made mistakes, we misjudged. We didn't see the big picture. It took us time to understand what was really happening. That was very moving and touching. And there aren't that many films or plays or cultural events you can go to. Sports may be one of them, which you and I share a love of, but where you can end up in conversation and even in friendship, but have deep ideological and political differences.
Yeah. And the key characters in the film, what's also fascinating is that when I was listening to them as I watched the film, I've had conversations with family members, certain friends, that sounded exactly like the guys in the film. Like, it really is if we are frozen in time. And another big takeaway for me was that at the end of the day, we all kind of always end up caring about the same things: affordability, patriotism, whatever rights one thinks we have and don't have or being taken away from us. Like, to me, there was no difference between the people on both sides in the film and what they were expressing 55 years ago and what people were talking about today. And I think that's why the film will resonate with a lot of people when they watch it.
I hope so. I mean, I think it was really important to convey. We have this moment where, we have construction workers who's also a veteran, talking about, like, he arrives by accident at the riot downtown. And at first he's kind of sympathetic to the students. He didn't like the war, but then he sees them step on the flag.
Right.
And it was really
important
to show this because, what's hard for people to understand is, while it's well known to our culture based on 1,000 books and 100 films of the anti-war movement and their cause to end this dreadful war. What's important in that moment to see, while they're trying to end a dreadful war, you have to see the righteousness in that man too, because he has been portrayed as this gung-ho simpleton who's attached to the flag, so he's not going to let you burn it. But what the hope is in that scene that you actually see is, no, he's standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. In his mind, he's standing up for the veterans who died, for his comrades who lost an arm or lost their well-being in war.
Right.
To him, when they're showing disrespect to the flag, they're disrespecting that sacrifice.
Yes, he took it way deeper.
We're making. And so he's also standing up for the powerless in that moment. And it was important in that moment to show that these people, that both sides could have a sense of rightness in that moment.
Right. Mark, what do you hope people take away from this film? What do you want them to remember?
Well, I want them to repeat everything you've just said, Andy. I mean, you are, of course, a great audience, so well informed, talking, you've had so many kind of pundits and political insiders on your podcast. My hope is that this film gets out there, but that especially in the democratic world that is trying to figure out, how do we go ahead? How do we move forward? That the relevance you see, and certainly I hope other people see, will kind of get them to look at some of this. Just get rid of that, sorry. In a way that this idea that we are so politically correct, and that you got to be this, that, and the other on every issue, that there is a more openness on the Democratic side in terms of moving forward. I think in New York City, you mentioned affordability, what we're dealing with right now. It was upsetting to see Democratic leaders afraid to embrace the winner, Mandami. And obviously, I get they're afraid, they're going to be branded, but at the same time, they're already branded
Right.
as old. When's the next generation going to ever step forward? When's some new energy? When is somebody bringing young people, progressive young people, open-minded young people into the mix with working class people who want to make this city not just a gated community? So obviously that's one of the hopes. And then at the same time, we've shown it to MAGA supporters who embrace the film, and it opens them up to having more of a civil dialogue and a constructive dialogue instead of the poison that we see, unfortunately, so much on cable TV and other venues. So that's my hope. At the same time, I feel terrible for public TV. I feel this is so ironic. At the moment they're trying to bury public TV, here is the kind of film that public TV should be doing.
Exactly.
That speaks to different sides. That's not just what they have, said repeatedly, left-wing propaganda. This is another way of approaching these subjects. I wish some of those who claim on the Republican side to be representing working people, who want the Republican Party to be a new majority, where, as Nixon's vision and part of Reagan's, that working people, it's not just blue bloods, it's blue collar also, that they will see in the film a way forward. That's my hope.
Good luck with the premiere. It's Tuesday, the 30th on PBS. The film, again, is called Hard Hat Riot. The book, David's book, is called The Hard Hat Riot. Go out and get that book as well. And thanks for coming on. And let's talk about your next project when it happens. Come back.
All right, Andy. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
All right.